Welcome to the Leadership Expose podcast. This podcast is for leaders at diverse levels and organizations around the world who are seeking to transform their leadership, to level up their business, and to create an impact in the lives of people all around them. Business topics, trends, innovation, and the intersection with leadership is the focus. We enable success. I'm your host, Stephen Paul. In this episode, we chat with a leader who has had a corporate leadership career and now focused on building and acquiring companies amongst other business ventures. We welcome Sam Turner. He's the CEO of Advents HVAC Group Limited and has other senior roles in other firms. Sam has previously held executive level positions with global firms, and he has not only transformed sales organizations, but also integrated organizations commercially. We will hear about Sam's journey and his focus on building a group of small, medium businesses, the acquisitions of businesses, and learn about how he goes about doing this and bringing highlights of his vision to create a platform for SMEs to flourish. Sam, welcome to the show. Thank you. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Stephen. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on. Doing great. Yeah, just discussing earlier. Enjoying the brilliant sunshine that is the UK weather at the moment. So all good. Yes, and thanks again for having me. Excited to be on.
Wonderful, Sam. Yes, we were actually chatting about the weather. It's currently about, well, it's going to be over 33 degrees where I'm at.
Yes. Which is not what the UK is built for in terms of infrastructure and everything else. So whilst in many cases that's kind of, many countries that's normal, here in the UK it becomes a challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to keep the fans running, the air conditioning running wherever we are, if we can do that. But no, wonderful. Sam, tell us where you're based. I know you're based in the UK, but tell us just a little bit about where you're based.
Yeah, so I'm based about 45 minutes north of London, in a small town near, I guess the biggest town is Bedford, if people know that, in Bedfordshire, so not far from there. But I've only been back in the UK for about 11 months, having spent 15 years in different countries, in Spain, a little bit in Singapore, and the last 4 years in Switzerland. So good to be back. And enjoying life now back in the UK.
Well, welcome back, and glad to hear that you're integrating back into the UK. So just building on that, tell us more about your journey. Where did it all begin from a personal perspective and the intersection with how you came into the professional world?
Yeah, sure. So when I left school, I actually sort of go all the way back there because I think it's a defining moment for me. I actually wanted to play professional football, and I did that for full time for 2.5 years. When I left school, played for my hometown club, which was a club called Luton Town, for those in the UK that would know that. Yeah. So that was great. Unfortunately, I didn't progress from there. So at 19, I kind of dropped out and played semi-professional. But what that did do is it kind of taught me a number of lessons, I think. One of those lessons was about winning, and I had this kind of determination to and drive to kind of always win. And then when I came out of the game, and I had lots of my friends, if you like, still playing and going on to do good things in the sport, that really kind of drove me to try to be successful at something, I think. So that was in my early part of my career. I had this drive where I would work harder than everyone else, and that was my win, not that I was more capable, in order to sort of progress through my early career. And from there, I actually, without going into the details, fell into kind of corporate life and into finance in corporate life. I spent most of my career in TUI, which, for those that know, is the largest travel organization in Europe, or holiday organization in Europe. It wasn't TUI at the time, but it's now known as TUI. And I did various roles there in finance. I qualified as an accountant whilst I was there, and culminating in sort of fairly senior roles. I was the finance director of the airline at the time, as well as other roles, and a number of different roles within the group. And about 15 years ago, so I was there for about 8 years, something like that. And then about 15 years ago, I got the opportunity to move to a division that was headquartered in Spain as the CFO for one of the businesses within that division. And it was a growing business. It was an international or soon to be global business. We were a wholesaler of accommodation. So if you ever go to book a holiday or accommodation somewhere, anywhere in the world, whoever you book with, they normally don't have the direct relationship with the hotel. It's normally booked through, let's say, an aggregator. We were the largest aggregator. When I moved there, we were about 750 million in revenue. And I remember we grew that. It was an exciting time, rapid growth. We were averaging sort of 30% plus growth for 5 or 6 years consecutively. We were part of a UK listed PLC at the time. Myself and the MD used to enjoy going to the annual budget reviews and 5-year plan reviews because we were always over delivering, upgrading the numbers. It was a really nice time and a great learning point for me in terms of how to grow internationally, and actually that was a large part of the growth was international expansion through Latin America, through Asia, and a big part was Asia in that time. We grew from a very small business to now, or then what it became, which was a sizable part of the business. So we grew that from about 750 to about 3 billion in sales over that kind of 6-year period or so. And during that time, I realized that I was less interested in the technical side of finance and more interested in the general management of the organization. I was also responsible for things like strategy, things like business intelligence or data. So it wasn't like a core just technical finance role. But I agreed with the MD at the time to shift into and learn something, a different function. So he gave me the sales function to look after. So I flipped from being the CFO into being effectively the sales director globally, which was a really interesting time and a really interesting learning curve for me. We had thousands of customers, some very small, some very large. If you think of any travel provider, from a small travel agent to a large online travel player, they were our customers. So dealing with all of those relationships through a fairly large team globally was super interesting. And then we were then sold by TUI to private equity. It was a 50-50 joint venture between Cinven, which is a large UK buyout firm, and the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, which is a sort of a more long-term player, obviously based in Canada, but has a presence globally. We were sold by, the value was about 1.4 billion euros that we were sold for. And we quickly went then to acquire our 2 largest competitors. And really there were kind of 3 global players, really. So we basically then sought to integrate and merge 3 businesses together at the same time. And to give you some scale, we went then from a 3 billion revenue company to a 6 billion revenue company with those 2 acquisitions. And they were done effectively at the same time. So that process of integrating was quite painful. I was responsible for pretty much all of the commercial functions. We had both on the sales side, but also on the buying side, which was having all the relationships with the hoteliers globally. And we had close to 2,000 people in my teams across the world, based in probably about 80 countries across the world. So very sort of global role, but we spent 2 years integrating these businesses together, which was, as you can imagine, quite a painful task. We had to integrate not only the teams, but the systems, and it was a very technology-driven business. So the systems side was quite complex. We shared a lot of the same customers and a lot of the same suppliers. So again, integrating the contracts between having 3 contracts to 1 contract. So a very, very painful time. And I think it was through that time that I decided that actually I didn't want to spend the rest of my career in a sort of corporate setting. And I think the reasons for that were three sort of main reasons. One, at the time we were acquired by private equity, and then we went to do effectively like a buy and build effectively in this space. We were supported by McKinsey consultants for effectively 2 years solidly, but the politics during that time just became really difficult to manage. And for me, I'm not somebody who enjoys that at all. And I don't like to kind of have to play the game, if you like, and I like to be kind of transparent and honest and open. And sometimes maybe that went against me. But I really didn't enjoy that. The pressure was quite intense because maybe the performance wasn't quite as where we wanted it to be in terms of integrating those businesses. I was on a plane every week pretty much, and I have two young children, and it got to the point where literally every Sunday night I was leaving, coming home on a sort of Thursday evening, and I really, not regret, because I had some great experiences, but enough was enough from that perspective. And the third point was I was responsible for all of these teams and the commercial performance, but the way the leadership then was working is I had very little, let's say or decision-making capability over the major decisions, and therefore, having all of the accountability but none of the autonomy for me just became quite stressful. I think that's an important lesson. You've got to kind of balance those two things. You can't have one out of kilter with the other. And for those three reasons, I decided I didn't want to continue in that setting, and I therefore spent a long time thinking about what it is I wanted to do. I managed to agree a great, let's say, exit with my employer, which was very amicable. Just at the time, just pre-pandemic actually, and then the pandemic happened, and you can imagine that a travel business, we went from considerably profitable business to almost running out of cash in the space of 8 weeks. So it was a very turbulent time. Thankfully, the business is doing well again now, but it just became clear at that point that I was due to leave in a couple of months, I think in July anyway, and we accelerated that a couple of months because of that, everything was changing, and it just made sense for me to go at that point. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what it is that I wanted to do, what I was good at, where I wanted to spend my time, what my purpose and my purpose in life. I think I did a lot of soul searching, a lot of reflection, and then I came up with the idea, and then researched the idea, spent a lot of time training around that, around building a platform, building a group of companies where I could help small business prosper as being part of that platform, as opposed to trying to fight independently as a small business. So that's what I'm doing, and that's the reason why, and it's ticks lots of my boxes around having a bit more flexibility, being in control, being able to develop people, creating a collaborative framework. Collaboration is a key value of mine, and that's my dream, to see these businesses collaborating together. It's not that I'm going to merge them. Having done that several times in my corporate career, that's not the intention. It's how do we get some collaborative benefits from these complementary businesses as part of this group. So that's what I'm doing. We acquired the first business back in early December, and we've now acquired 3 businesses. So we have 3 businesses. We're doing about, let's say, £15 million in revenue, and about 1.4 million pounds in EBITDA. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. But the plan is to significantly scale that over the next 3 or 4 years.
Amazing, Sam. So basically, from high school, pro football, to corporate life and finance, to sales, to mergers and acquisitions, to a pivotal moment to basically start your own vision of bringing SMEs together. And you touched on a few elements. You've had a wonderful journey, I mean, looking at your career, just listening, there must have been lots of lessons that you have actually learned through those different twists and turns within the corporate world, but also through your childhood moments to where you were at. And we'll come to that, but that appears to be a platform for you to use those lessons and leverage that to what you're doing now. So tell us a little bit more about this vision that you've got and how you're actually doing it. You did touch on it briefly, but keen to hear a little bit more about it.
Yes, so I explored different options, and I really went through a process. And I'm fortunate in that I had time. So I had time, let's say gardening leave, where you know we were living in Switzerland at the time. We couldn't travel anywhere else because of the pandemic. So I had a lot of time to reflect, read, research, which I appreciate. Most people don't have that time because most people are in a sort of corporate context. They're, as I was, kind of running the, in the rat race, so to speak, and you just don't get the time to stand back and think. And whenever people ask me for advice, and I still have a lot of ex-colleagues and team members that I keep in contact with, and they always ask me for some advice around what they should do career-wise, and I always ask them the question, what is it that you want? What do you really want? And most people can't answer that question, which is, it sounds like an obvious question to answer, but actually, and I couldn't answer it probably 2 years ago either. What is it that you really want? And if that's the case, why do you want that? What do you need to do if really that's what you want? But taking the time to think about that and why really sort of enabled me to piece together what was the best thing for me. So coming back to your question and on this vision. So I enjoy spending time developing people. I enjoy spending time with small business. I did that a lot with my sales role, where I was, helping and supporting small businesses grow effectively, and I really, really enjoyed that. And I think I can bring some expertise, if you like, to helping to scale those businesses that maybe they don't have that professional capacity at the levels we're talking about. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy the finding how businesses and how people can collaborate together. So that was another kind of key essence or key facet to the vision in terms of what we're trying to create on this group. But I also enjoy, and I think I'm good at, the balance between dealing with let's say the corporate side, and in my world now, or in my previous world, in my sales and commercial roles, I had the kind of to do with the, obviously in the boardroom, being accountable for the performance and dealing with the private equity guys and whatever, which is fine. And with my finance background, etc., I can talk the language. I understand what the kind of key KPIs are and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm equally happy talking to the guy on the shop floor, so to speak, if that makes sense. And I enjoy that, and I really value sort of being able to go between those two things. And this vision for me about building a group really plays to that strength, because you have to spend a lot of time on the finance side. So we operate with lenders, and so we're using external debt. So you have to be able to know your numbers inside out and all of the stuff that comes with that. I've raised some money from the investors, so I've had to sort of communicate the vision and do the pitch decks and manage those stakeholders, which are clearly a completely different set of stakeholders than talking to small business owners about the possibility of acquiring their business. And I think having that ability to really operate and enjoy that was a key thing for me. So these are all the things that I wanted to kind of spend my time doing. And that's why I sort of created over time, or the vision for me would be to create a group of companies. We say 10 plus companies, all in my case, the HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, which is the kind of sector name, and any kind of trades or services or products that are complementary to that. So it doesn't have to fit exactly within that, but if they're somehow complementary, that can be included. Each of the businesses will have probably a slightly different value proposition. It's not we're buying exactly the same company in 10 different locations with then the ability to take the back office and centralize that, etc. No, we want to run these as fairly independent businesses, but on a collaborative framework. So each of the business owners or the MDs, after they've sold the business, will be able to collaborate together to find wins that support both or both businesses, so to speak. So we're looking for that. We're looking for collaboration, I would say, in a few areas. For things like being able to cross-sell to each other's customer base. So I might provide a slightly different service, but your customer also needs the service that I provide. So let's have the relationship there. That's a big opportunity. Having buying power opportunities, if we use the same suppliers, for example, is another obvious one. I think having expertise that can run across the group is a great example of a complementary benefit. So, for example, it might be that one company has a specific expertise in the latest technology for efficient heat pump technology, which will replace gas boilers, for example, here in the UK. Well, if we can leverage that expertise across the group and actually all of the engineers are trained on that technology, etc., that's another complementary benefit. So it's looking for those complementary benefits. And then there's a group layer that can provide expertise around strategy, strategic skills, financial skills, maybe things like online skills if we want to grow the consumer business. And these businesses don't do well with websites and driving traffic and all those sorts of things. So if we wanted to grow in the consumer side of the business, offering services, that's something that maybe we could leverage from a group perspective. So you've got the complementary elements, the group components in terms of the layer on top. And that's where each of these businesses, my vision is that we're able to, in 3-4 years, see that these groups have enhanced their business, have enhanced their margins ultimately as a result of collaborating with each other. We have a collaborative framework. People are enjoying being part of the group. We're able to develop people within that group context. And that's my vision. Clearly, we also have some fairly big ambitions from a financial perspective as well. And I'll, want to deliver the results for investors and also for myself. And at some point there may be an exit, although I don't have a particular strategy at the moment. And I would say, and the last point on this, I would say the wealth, if you like, creation opportunity that does exist through doing something like this, and we can talk maybe a little bit about how you create value in that context and why it's so interesting. But for me, that value creation is about how I can create enough value to pursue the vision that I have for my life and my purpose for my life, which is about helping other people.
Yeah.
So I have a very clear target in creating wealth in order to put that wealth to use in certain places. So it's not for me to sit on a yacht in the Caribbean, although a holiday or two might be nice, but it's actually to actually do something and really give back. And I have very clear plans around that as well.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on that one. So there is definitely an end goal here, and it's very much aligned with your purpose, which you've highlighted.
Yeah.
So just taking a step back here a little bit, and we'll come back to the purpose. The concept of bringing these companies together is amazing. You've mentioned about collaboration, and you've mentioned about the complementary or the enabling elements, but also those group elements as well from a strategy, finance, and so forth. And you also mentioned about 10 companies. Is that just a number that you've come up with, or are you planning to grow to a larger number? It's more like and after 10 what then?
Yes, I mean, it's a great question. In reality, the 10 is driven by a modeling exercise that says, how do we get to these sorts of numbers? So I have a number of different scenarios, and it's an average revenue times the number of businesses. That could look different. So you could end up buying much bigger businesses and have slightly fewer. It's a proxy for the size of businesses that we think we'll have now. or that we think that we'll buy. And right now the average is 5 million of revenue, for example. So if you took that, and 10 businesses would give you sort of 50 million of acquired revenue, and obviously you'd want some organic growth and some growth in there. So we have, let's say, a target that we've shared with investors of getting to kind of 60 million in revenue. In an ideal world, I have a vision maybe to get to 100, but I'm not promising that to anyone. And clearly, we're all realists as well, right? So you learn as you go, and you adapt. You'll have to adapt, I guess, the approach as you go. Yeah. Somebody asked me yesterday, because I'm recruiting at the moment for a CFO, and I was interviewing yesterday, and he said, well, you're going to focus more on bringing more acquisitions in, or focusing on the growth opportunities within the ones that you've got. And it's the $1 million question, because actually there is a lot of opportunity to grow these businesses. If you look at the maybe the way, or the opportunity, or the gaps in if you like, the way they've been managed over time without being disrespectful. And therefore the opportunities that if we really sort of focused on certain areas, we could really grow here. But that would take time and effort to do. And obviously then bringing other companies in takes time and effort to do. So there is that question mark in terms of what and how do you do that, at what pace. And we'll adapt as we go, but that's kind of gives you a flavor. I think the other important factor here, and maybe is an interesting one for listeners to sort of understand the concept of this, because it's a key sort of from an M&A perspective. It's a key one is the multiple, what we call the multiple arbitrage between, the difference between buying and selling. So if you buy a company at, let's say for argument's sake, 5 times profits, and you're able to sell that at 7, you've got that sort of multiple arbitrage of 2. Now, obviously that sounds a bit like, well, how do you buy at 5 and sell at 7, right? So, but the beauty of actually building a group is typically the multiples increase as the revenue, as the business grows. And the reason it does that is because it's less risky. Typically, less risk means higher price, and less risk comes from having more diversification, more numbers. You're not ever then dependent on one customer or one person, etc. The bigger you become. Okay, so that's a key. That's a key, probably the biggest driver of value. So if you were to put on the same example, you were to buy 5 companies at 5 times, those companies will all be worth probably 7. Without doing anything. That's the beauty of the play as well, because it allows us to benefit from a multiple arbitrage to create value. Now, it's not 100% about that. Obviously, we want to grow and make sure the businesses can prosper on that platform, but naturally there is a value creation that happens through just being bigger as a group.
Yeah. And Sam, very, very, very interesting. Thank you. So if I was a company or a business owner of one of these companies that wants to be part of your group, how would a conversation between you and I sound like, just initially?
Yeah, it depends, because what we do is we reach out to companies that are both on the market. So some companies will be wanting to exit, wanting to sell, and in the profile of companies we're looking at, we do tend to have a lot of people at kind of retirement age that have built the company, and maybe now it's the time to move on. So you have a lot of those businesses that may be on the market, and that's maybe a slightly different conversation. And then we also reach out to companies that maybe are not on the market, but maybe the response rates from those conversations maybe is not as high, but there's still some good concept. One of the deals that we just closed was from somebody who wasn't on the market, and actually we contacted and explored, and then he became interested, and we had the dialogue. But the typical dialogue with somebody who's on the market, they're looking to exit, will be us or me basically explaining what we're trying to do. And the vision is very, very important for these business owners. If you think about it, they've probably founded the business, they've grown it from nothing, it's probably got maybe 30 or 40 people now in this business. Probably people that have been there for many years. Their name is important to them. So what we do, we're very clear is, look, what our vision is not to destroy any of that. And actually it's to build on that legacy. We want to retain the name, the brand. We want to retain the management in the business, the key people, the key relationships. We want you on side to be supporting in a sort of transitionary way. And some business owners want to just take some chips off the table and want to continue to manage the business. They enjoy it, but maybe without the stress of ownership. So that's one acquisition that we've got. The MD is the former owner, and he's continuing to manage the business. So that's great, because that gives us a management solution from day one, because I would say that's probably the biggest risk, that there's a dependency on that business owner. They leave, and then you know that can be a challenge. So there always has to be a management solution. So, but that's the conversation. It's about us explaining what we do, explaining the benefits of what we do, and you know that's the kind of first piece. And that if they're not clear on that, and I would say for us it's quite good, because it's quite a good sell almost. Yeah. Not that we're selling something we're not delivering, but for them it's like, okay, you're not going to destroy my name, you're not going to basically rip out stuff, you're not going to use your own resources over here for this, and therefore you don't need these people. So that's a big win. And then, you know, we won't talk about value probably straight away. We'll talk about that once we've established a little bit of rapport, a little bit of trust, and then we'll have a conversation about what we think the business is worth. And I think there's you know, there are some unrealistic expectations there, but if you speak to enough business owners, you can provide enough evidence to say, look, this is broadly where the market's at. Now, I've spoken to 120, I know because I track the numbers, 120 businesses in the last 6 months. And therefore I know roughly where the kind of market is at and value is at. And some people still say, no, I want this for my business. That's fine. That's great. And let's keep in touch. If you want to reach out to me in 6 months, or you want any help at all, then let me know. But you can't waste time on where those unrealistic expectations exist. So what we want to do is pay, you know, the market's price for that, structured in a reasonable way. Reasonable means, you know, it's some de-risking from our side. We will always want to defer some of the consideration, which is standard in the industry, but striking that balance of what the seller wants and what they're trying to achieve, and what makes sense for us.
Yeah. No, thank you, Sam. Sam, let's talk a little bit about your leadership here. You're a leader in your own right. Tell us a little bit more about your leadership and some of the personal life lessons, which you did touch upon earlier on.
Yep.
But how that has actually transformed the way you're leading now, at a very high strategic level.
Yeah.
And also tie that into your purpose as well, end goal.
Yeah, interesting. It's a great question. I mean, I believe quite strongly in certain things that are important for leaders to do. And leadership clearly isn't about a position. It's about how you demonstrate certain things and take ownership for certain things. It's not just all about the way you sit in the hierarchy. But I think what's important for leaders, and I don't see this enough in business, and I categorize them as sort of 6 C's. I think it's 5 or 6 C's, and the first is clarity. Yeah, so actually having clarity in your own mind about what you're trying to achieve is first and foremost. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to create that. But then creating that vision, and being also clear about expectations, so having that clarity, I think is really important. Kind of linked to that, to be compelling with it. So if you don't believe in something, you can't expect people to kind of want to jump on the bus and follow you. So, you know, and that's got to be authentic, right? So you got to find, and like for me now, it's 100% authentic around what I really truly believe is possible, and what will be great for everyone on board. So I'm really sort of passionate about that, but being compelling, communicating as well. I see I don't think you can communicate enough, and I think leaders fall short most of the time in communicating. They think, well, I've communicated what we're trying to do once, you know, and there's some research around this that says, you know, you have to tell people 7 times before they actually get it. You know, I think there's clearly some truth in that. So being you're over communicating and linked to that, the consistency with that. If you start jumping around, the 1 minute we're doing this, the next minute we're doing that, you just lose the trust of, I think, of people. So that compelling, consistent message, I think, is there. But the other side of it is the caring, and I think this is a key ingredient in great leadership. And it's a great question around, you know, are leaders born, or can it be taught? And I would sit on the fence and say it was probably a bit of both, because I think having a deep sort of care for individuals within your organization and your team, I think makes you a much better leader. But not everyone is born that way, if that makes sense. Now you can sort of teach some of that stuff if you like, but you know, you've got, for me, it's about really demonstrating that you've got empathy with your people, and actually you're caring about them, and you talk to them, you understand what's going on in their lives. And I think that's super important to keep that relationship at that level. So that caring aspect for me is the fifth. And the last one isn't a C, but I always call it the 6 C's, which is accountability. So it's the accountability. So not quite a C, but accountability is important. So it's all those other things you say, well, that's all kind of nice and could be argued maybe some fluffy stuff. But I think the accountability, which is holding yourself to be accountable for things and taking responsibility for things, but also holding your people to account, is also important. But that is far easier to do once you've provided the clarity and actually what's expected of people. So having the difficult conversations when things are not going right and being honest and candid with people, I think is important. So for me, that's kind of, they're the kind of key components, if you like, of how I would look at leadership and what's important to me and where I would try to focus. Like I say, in terms of linked to my sort of vision and what we're doing, it sort of comes through. So having this compelling vision and trying to create clarity in everyone's mind about the journey ahead, it is quite difficult when you're dealing, you know, with each of the operating businesses and you're sat going through some operational issues. It becomes very in the weeds and very difficult, and there's some issues, and it all seems like it's a big drama because of something. And I think for that, especially that MD and the leadership team there, to really pull them up sometimes and say, look, we've got to deal with these issues, but in the context of where we're going here, what makes sense in the context of where we're going here. So having that, you know, being able to sort of point back to what are we trying to achieve here, and why is what we're doing important in the context of that. So for me, I kind of try and display those things in constantly trying to create that clarity, being consistent in the message, having the vision, but also caring about the individuals involved. It's personal. In small businesses, you also have politics. It's interesting, probably quite a different level, and actually some of the things that you think are not an issue become big issues, right? You know, the coffee in the kitchen, you know, that kind of stuff. So you have to be mindful of these things, but caring about people, asking about how they are, about, you know, recognizing they've got stuff going on at home and stuff like this. I think rather than dismissive and assuming they're robots to come and work in the workplace, that's important, even more in the small business context, I think. So yeah, it's just me trying to apply those things, but I think it's easy for businesses, especially in the small business context, to get so wrapped up in very operational things that it's important for them to see that, okay, this is in the context of where we're trying to go, and I think that's helpful for everyone involved.
Yeah, and Sam, it's a brilliant way you positioned it with the C's and the accountability, and as you were describing, you know, I interact with a lot of, you know, small medium businesses and startups, or leaders who are trying to build their businesses, and their mindset is very much within the product and, trying to build the company from that product perspective, lack of delegation, but also not very clear on the end goal as well.
Yeah.
And how you've described it and how you're actually bringing that to some of these businesses and building leaders is a big step, because that itself is helping them to not only bring that clarity, one of the C's that you just described, but actually the vision within themselves as to how they want to manage their business and reach their end goal as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the, and it's, that we all have gaps as well. So I enjoy all of those things, and I enjoy spending time on creating that, communicating that, being consistent with that. That's kind of like almost in my comfort zone. But I also recognize that things like systems and process are things I tend to shy away from because I don't either enjoy or not particularly good at. So it's not like you have so you have to kind of fill in for some of those things and maybe get some external support to support some of those things. But I think coming back to the businesses as well is, if you what we try and do with each business is we try and put like a simple framework in place to manage the business, which is like what I would describe as like a best practice, nothing rocket science, but a best practice holistic framework to help each business manage. Because if I went into any organization and sat with the MD and let's say his 2 or 3 key managers, and I said, right guys, what's the vision for this business? Or in fact, write it down individually and give it to me. It would be very different, I can guarantee. What's the where do you see the business in terms of the size? Where do you want to get to in terms of the size of the business in the next 5 years? And I've done this with one of them. Very different answers, very different. And it's like, well, how can we possibly be driving in the same direction, which we know we're not, with a very different view about where the future is, right? So what we try and do is also then drop into a simple framework to say, one of those key parts is create a vision. And a vision for us is, who are we? What's our values? Where are we headed? Which game are we in? Where are we playing? And how are we going to win? And what does the future look like in terms of size in 5 years, 10 years? And then we bring that down to kind of 1 year view. Then we look at have we got the right people? Have we got the right people in the right seats?
Yeah.
The people display the values that we identified are important to us, because if not, it's not going to work long term. Have we got the right data? Are we looking at the right things? A classic is, well, we do look at a P&L. It's like, well, a P&L is kind of looking backwards. What are you looking at each week to say you're on track with these things? Because you want to make it more predictable going forward. And then process as part of that. So we do sort of try and look at this little sort of framework for each business. And that's another big win, I think, because businesses, they don't have that. They're managing day to day, operationally, as they have done, not really clear on where they're going. Most process sits in somebody's head. They're not looking at any sort of leading indicators, so the numbers might go up and down like this because there's no control of those numbers. So that's where I think we can bring some expertise. But you can't also be super corporate and say, let's do a 60-page strategy document for a £5 million business. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So all that vision stuff, values, we put on a 2-page document. That's it, covering all of those aspects where we want to be. So it's very simplistic, but it's important to align everyone as well. And I think that's a useful process, but it takes time. It takes time in the business, but I think that's where we can bring some value, and I think that's good practice as well.
Excellent. Sam, what are the important topics or trends on your mind these days that you feel might impact? I mean, like not only your businesses that you're trying to build, but also just generally across the ecosystem.
Well, I think you've got obviously some key macro challenges out there at the moment, especially where inflation is at, which is an impact for everyone. It's been an impact for us. We have supply chain issues as well, and what we do, we install a lot of whether it be heating systems or air conditioning systems, etc. So there's a supply chain at the back of that. That's been impacted by Brexit, the pandemic, now the situation in Ukraine, inflation, gone through the roof on raw materials. Some of the component prices are 20, 30, 40, 50% what they more than what they were a year ago. So there are some clear macro challenges that the industry and the wider economy, obviously, in different shapes or forms, has to address. And I think that's critical, and that's caused us to really focus on certain key things to make sure certain key things are in place, renegotiating contracts with customers to be more flexible about pricing and being more rigorous with our supply management and stuff like that. So I would say that's kind of key. I think then you've got some other interesting things like the whole working from home dynamic, which in big corporate is clearly changed completely the way people spend their time. I think probably I'm not a fan of working from home 5 days a week. I think it destroys the culture of a business and ultimately will end in poor results. But I think there's obviously a hybrid there that will be going forward. But in small businesses, typically they don't think about that as being feasible. So if you're office based, you're office based. There's no home working. In a very small, let's say, traditional business, it might be different for technology driven businesses and stuff. So, but I see that starting to come. So you get new joiners come and they're sort of asking that questions. So for us in small business, traditional business world, how we wrestle with that working from home piece, which is a bit of a lag on how the big corporates have been wrestling with that over the last 12, 18 months. I see that as another interesting trend. And then the whole sort of climate piece, which has an impact on our industry. The kind of getting to the government targets over time, what that means. And for me, that's one of the interesting things, because I think the more I learn about the industry, and I'm not an expert in it, the more interesting. Well, firstly, I had no idea that the impact on gas heating in homes is such a massive impact on the environment. So. Actually, the more I learn about it, the more interested I am in terms of how we can be at the forefront of changing that and actually help facilitate that through. But I just think all of that macro trend is useful for our industry, because it means overall there'll be more focus on changing systems and products that are used, which overall will mean more demand for the industry in the medium term. So I think that's a positive thing. But yeah, so lots of interesting, I would say, dynamics, both from a macro and from a industry perspective over the coming couple of years.
Yeah, those are definitely important, pertinent, and relevant topics for businesses, and even at board level. You can't get away from these because they impact you as an individual, as a leader, as a business as well. And if you're not thinking about it, if you're not talking about it, having healthy debates about it, and having that outlook, then your business is not going to grow the way you expect it to be growing.
And I think that's another you see these the whole climate change, also with the whole energy prices and the way they've been. I know they've come off a little bit in the recent weeks, but generally speaking, with sky high energy prices put more pressure on that. What do we do? What's the newer sources of energy? How does all that play out? But I still think, talking to small businesses and talking to owners of small businesses, most businesses are still head down in terms of we do what we're doing. We're operationally managing, like this. There isn't enough strategic thinking around, right, how do we accelerate some of the stuff here? And that's another opportunity, I think, for our group, because I think with a bit more strategic thinking, we can also acquire businesses that maybe piece together a jigsaw for us to be at the forefront of some of this stuff going forward. Because I think most small businesses in the sector are not necessarily very forward thinking about what's happening and how they can be at the forefront and contribute to it.
Yeah, it is just that recognition and awareness of that wider ecosystem, and really plugging in those interconnections and helping. So yeah, definitely you've hit the right spots there. Sam, tell us a little bit about you. You know, what does a day in the life of Sam look like?
Uh,
Morning to night.
yeah, so I mean, the good thing about what I do is I wanted to be very conscious and intentional about where I spend my time and make sure that it's spending time where where I enjoy. So I have a mixture of things. If I'm going through completing on a deal, which normally speaking will be somewhere in the process of completing on a deal, that depending on how close to the end that is,
Mhm.
will mean I'm spending a lot of time on those kind of legal or the contract stuff with the lawyers or the lender or the seller, and just kind of tying all of those things together, which takes more management. But I also spend a lot of time sourcing new opportunities, talking to business owners about the possibility of of wanting to exit or join the group as well as another option. Don't sell, maybe just, or don't leave, but maybe join the group, and there's another option. But I also spend time in each of the businesses. So now we have three. I'll typically spend not every week, but a day a week in the three businesses. So again, not every week. So probably half the time I'm in the businesses. And again, it's not that I spend a full day and I spend a full day with everyone, because I can go and work from there as well. But we'll certainly have our weekly, let's say, management meetings around when I'm there. We'll be looking at some of the key KPIs and whether we're on track or not, and how we can support those businesses. So it's a really nice combination. I also spend time, dedicate some time on development of the key people in those businesses. So I like to do that. One of the key things that is typical on the MDs that we have is they come more from a technical route, i.e., from an engineer route.
Mhm.
They don't have, for example, an appreciation of the financials of what that means. What does a balance sheet and cash flow look like, and why is it important? And so I do spend some time trying to educate and develop them into, let's say, more rounded
Mhm.
MDs of the business as well, and that's something I really enjoy. I also spend time facilitating some networking groups. I have some other part of a mastermind that I sort of connect with other business owners on a fairly regular basis. So it's really quite varied. But the good thing is, it's really down to me. So if I decide, well, today I actually want to spend some time with the kids because they're off, then I'll do that. And that's the kind of beauty of, and that's one of the things that I wanted to tick the boxes. I'm not at the beck and call of the corporate that I have to be in meetings from 8:30 till 6:30 solidly every day, or I have to be on a plane in these places. It's kind of much more up to me now, which is nice.
Yeah. Sam, what's the next big business or personal adventure for you, or are you already in it?
Yeah, I think we're at the early stages of something that could be really exciting. I think we've got the first group hire, which is the CFO role, which is a key role because it'll be my sort of key partner. So it'll be exciting when we have somebody at a group level, because we haven't needed that until now. We've got the three businesses, so that's going to be interesting. And then looking for the next couple of deals. So we're really at the early stages, I would say. I'm not ready to kind of jump into another adventure right now. It's kind of
Yeah.
building on what we've got, and trying to strike the right balance between bringing more companies on board and really sort of helping and supporting the businesses that we do have to excel. I think that's going to be the big focus for me, and continuing to enjoy life, but back in the UK.
Wonderful. Sam, we're coming to a close. Any closing messages or challenge to other leaders you'd like to make here?
um, I would say maybe a couple of things. So, firstly, again, if part of what I enjoy and part of my purpose is around helping other people. So, if there's anything that I can do, advice or sharing experience or whatever it might be, then I'm more than happy to be contacted by anyone. That's number one. I think the importance, and I touched on it earlier, around creating that compelling vision as a leader, and actually trying to be consistent and clearly communicate that in an ongoing way to your teams, whatever side, whether you're in a corporate, whether you're in your own business, whatever that might be. I think that's massively underplayed and underserved by leaders generally. And in my experience, people think that, well, they've kind of done that once and they've ticked that, and it's you have to be consistent with that. And I think there's a great opportunity to really energize people and motivate people to be part of that journey. And I would encourage everyone to really sort of think about, are they doing enough in that regard? Probably that's my sort of key other message.
Wonderful. Sam, thank you very much for being with us today and for providing your insights and sharing your journey. Thank you very much.
No, real pleasure, Stephen. Thanks for having me again.
Wonderful. Okay, folks, thank you very much for listening in, and stay tuned for our next episode where we hear from a leader who is a professional negotiator. I wonder what that is. So let's stay tuned for that one, and we'll hear more about it. Thank you and have a wonderful day.